Thank you very much for joining the webinar today. The webinar title is Literature Review for a Successful Research Paper. Because we have non-Cantonese speaking students, I will conduct the webinar in English. I'm Ella. I'm the presenter. My colleague Vincent is here to support. If my voice is soft, you may adjust the volume in both of your earphone and your computer. During the presentation, if you have any questions, you might type your question in the chat box. Please try to see if you can expand the purple icon in the bottom right-hand corner and find the chat icon. My colleagues will respond to your questions during the presentation. I will stop at the middle of the presentation and also at the end of the presentation to invite your questions. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat box. You might also email me to ask questions after the webinar. Overview. After this workshop, you should be able to know what is not a literature review, why a literature review is needed, when a literature review should be conducted, how to find the literature, how to do a good literature review, what is the literature review process. I think knowing the literature review process is important, especially for students, because when you are a student, you might not have a very deep understanding of your field, but you need to write a rather comprehensive literature review on your research topic. It basically means that you need to write something that you don't even understand yourself. If we know the literature review process, when we get lost and get stuck, we still know the key step to guide us to make progress. Common mistakes. It is good to start with the common mistakes so we can avoid. The first mistake relating to writing and structure issues, for example, low linking and integration of each study or paragraph. Low clearly thought out structure. Includes too much information without identifying the major issues or debates. Too many direct quotations and inconsistent citation styles. Try not to write a literature review in point forms. To have a good structure in our writing, we need to know the relationships among different studies, the relationships between sentences, paragraphs, and the key messages we want to deliver in each section. The second mistake relates to source issues. For example, the sources included are irrelevant to your research topic. It sounds weird, but it is very common because during our literature review process, we learn a lot and we refine and revise our research questions or topics. The studies we reviewed and include in our literature review a few months ago may not be relevant to our updated research topic. Sometimes we are too familiar with our writing and may not be able to notice this problem. Only include sources that validate your assumptions and do not consider contrary findings. I would say it depends on the purpose of your literature review. If the literature review is just one of the course assignments, you may still be able to get by with these strategies. But if the literature review is part of a PhD thesis, it is going to be a big problem. Other common mistakes are that a literature review does not include recent and important studies, not keeping enough bibliographical information. I hope after this workshop, you can avoid making these mistakes. Here is some definitions of literature review. Literature review is written documents that presents a logically argued case founded on a comprehensive understanding of the current state of knowledge about a topic of study. This case establishes a convincing thesis to answer the study's questions. Let us take a look at another definition. A systematic, explicit, and reproducible method for identifying, evaluating, and synthesizing the existing body of completed and recorded work produced by researcher, scholar, and practitioner. Writing a literature review requires a high-level cognitive work, and it is supposed to be difficult. No worry, we can handle it. What is a literature review? This definition is very short and easy to understand. A literature review is an account of what has been published on a topic by accredited scholars and researchers. Try to be selective in choosing what you review. Unless your study requires, try not to include materials from newspapers and social media, such as Facebook and Twitter, because most of them are not written by scholars. A literature review has these components: research topic and problem, rationale and significance, theory, concepts, and methodologies. The role of literature review in personal dimension. We might think writing a literature review is a learning process. During this process, we can learn followings in our research area: the key theory and concepts, the developmental history and significance, the appropriate vocabularies and interrelationships between subjects. For example, I study e-learning in my PhD. I learned collaboration and cooperation in this field have a very different meaning. The methodological assumptions, data collections, and data analysis techniques. What is needed to be done further? After we know all this, we are ready to do research to advance knowledge. Look so happy. Role of literature review in research. Why do we need to know its role? Because this somehow can help us to organize the literature that we are going to review. I just said that we should not write a literature review in points form, which means we need to group and review a bunch of study with a focus. What I'm going to mention can be viewed as a focus. The first role is to bring clarity and focus to the research topic, such as distinguishing what has been done from what needs to be done, discovering important theory and variables, identifying relationships between ideas and practices. When we are reviewing a bunch of studies, some of them can help me to explain my theoretical framework, so I group them together. Some of the study can help to explain what has been done so far in the field, so I group them together. Reviewing a bunch of study with the same focus can help us to summarize and synthesize ideas. Without this kind of grouping, it is quite impossible for us to do so. The second role is to identify research gaps, such as rationalizing the significance of the problem, identifying areas of controversy, formulating research questions. The other roles include contextualizing the research project so that we can show the reader, more importantly, the examiner, we are familiar with the state-of-the-art development, and helping to improve a study methodology so we can develop insights into the main methodologies and research techniques. Depth of literature review. A master level thesis needs to be analytical, summative, covering topics, methodological issues, and research techniques, possibly two literature-based chapters, one on methodological issues and another on theoretical issues. A PhD level thesis needs to be analytical synthesis, covering all known literature on the problem, high level of conceptual linking within and across theory, summative and formative evaluation of peers' work on the problem, the depth of the discussion on relevant philosophical traditions and ways in which they relate to the problem. I advise you to read the thesis written by your academic siblings, like students who share the same supervisor with you. Different professors may have different preference on the thesis. There are different types of literature review. It can be part of larger work, such as an introduction section to a journal article. and a chapter in a thesis. Literature review can be a standalone work, such as a course assignment and a review article. I will briefly explain what they are. This is an example of a standalone review article. In a standalone review article, we need to explain clearly the literature search process. The process should be systematic and reproducible. In case others want to conduct the same search, they can be identified the studies that are included in the review article. For example, the authors explain that 225 studies published between this time span are included in this review article. The study being reviewed focus on classroom dialogue in primary and secondary classroom. The goal of this study is to present what is currently known and where future research should be directed. Here, the author explains how they conduct the search. We decide to search using two sets of keywords, one set covering dialogue and associated terms, and the other set covering classroom and associated terms. Below, explain what those associated terms mean. The authors use the keywords and conduct search in Google Scholar and 4 databases. They also review the reference list of the study they found. Finally, the search process generated more than 15,000 publications, which were then the author developed 7 criteria. Study that met all 7 criteria become the review sample. This is an example of an empirical study in a journal article. The literature review starts from the introduction sections. After the introduction, there are 2 more literature review sections explaining epistemic beliefs and their developments, and epistemic belief and informal reasoning. The literature review sections explain everything you need to understand the objective of the study. Because journal articles have a very strict word limit, authors need to focus on reviewing theory and concepts used to frame the study and explain the data. Unlike the standalone review article, the author in this study did not explain the literature search process. This is an example of a chapter in a PhD thesis. Unlike an empirical study in a journal article, a thesis allows students to write a lot. In this example, the student is from education faculty. He used knowledge building theory in his thesis. Before reviewing this theory, the student review other theories that are important in education, such as Vygotsky, Piaget, and situated collisions. This can show to the examiners that the student is not only familiar with the theory used to frame the thesis, but also are familiar with other major theories in the field. Before I start to talk about the literature review process, I would like to invite your questions. If you have, please write down your question in the chat box. Okay. If no questions, then I will move on. There are 6 steps in the literature review process. 2 things I want to highlight. First, don't expect you can start to write the review right away. There are many preparations we need to do. Second, writing a literature review is neither a linear nor cyclical steps. These steps are iterative, which means we always need to go back and repeat some of the steps. For example, after I survey the literature, I learn more about my topic, and I realize my research questions are rather general. I want to reformulate my research questions and make them more specific. So I go back to revise my topic, and I need to conduct the search again. Please don't feel bad when you need to keep repeating some of the steps. It is the way it is. The first step of the literature review process is to select a topic that involves recognizing and defining the problem. The target is to have a well-defined statement to direct our search. There are many questions we should ask ourselves, such as what is the specific problem your literature review helps to define? What type of literature review you are conducting? What is the scope of your literature review? Here show an initial topic. To what degree do standardized test scores predict actual student achievements? We can look for and think about the subjects, verbs, and objects, and to make the topic more specific. The refined topic becomes, to what degree are the state standardized test score in language arts? Here we define what the standardized test score refers to. Predictive of individual student success. Here we specify the unit of analysis, which is a student, not a class. In college placement with regard to subject X exam. Here we define what achievement means. The second step is to develop the arguments. The goal is to create a process for solving the research problem. We need to present a logically argued case. To do so, we need to compile and arrange a set of facts in a logical fashion to prove the statements made about the research topic. We also need to present our case by arranging our claims, building evidence, organizing relevant data, and explaining what is known about the topic. For example, the statement is participatory leadership is the most effective style for leading a 21st century organization. We look for and think about the claims, arguments, evidence, and data. In the literature review, at least, we need to include what is known about leadership style, like what are the major leadership style researchers are talking about in the field. What is the characteristic of a 21st century organization? The third step is search the literature. In this step, we need to collect, preview, select, and organize information. The goal is to define the scope, such as what are the subject area, keywords, terms, and phrases, parameter, the inclusion and exclusion criteria. This one I will come back in the next slide. The important works and people in the field. Here is an inverted triangle. It may help us to adjust the scope of our search. It really depends on your research topic. If you do something very popular, you can find a lot of relevant study. You can be selective and only use the study that are most relevant and directly related to your field. But if you are working on something very new, you might have difficulty to find a lot of relevant study. You might broaden your scope to include study that are relevant to and overlap with your study. Here I want to show an example of the inclusion and exclusion criteria. The keywords are child abuse and neglect. Do not distinguish type of abuse and neglect. For the inclusion criteria, this is about what you want to do. You may be able to tell them right away. For example, evaluation of program to prevent child abuse and neglect. The study conducted from 1990s to 2009. Its family-based program focused simultaneously on and children. For the exclusion criteria, You might not be able to develop them at the beginning. You might conduct a literature search and review the abstract of the papers. Only the abstract is enough. After you read a bunch of abstracts, you should be able to tell what you don't want to include in your literature review. For example, the exclusion criteria become study aiming to predict the cause and consequences of abuse and neglect. This type of study normally use large-scale questionnaire survey rather than developing and evaluating the effectiveness of a program, so we don't want them. Evaluation of programs to treat child abuse and neglect. We want prevent, not treat. We also don't want essays on abuse, cross-sectional studies, consensus statements, and studies that do not produce judgment of effectiveness. We also do not want to include studies that focus on the advancement of methodology. We can plan the sources to be searched. It depends on what stage you are in. If you want a background information search, you may use encyclopedia, textbook, and our library search. You will find some relevant vocabulary, concepts, key studies, and authors' names. If you want to have a full cast search and analyze information needs, you may ask your supervisor to recommend some reading for you. I think it's wise to read your supervisor's work and read what they read. You may consult our subject librarian by filling in this form. Or consult our subject guides. For example, here. Here I'm interested in early childhood education. I can find a lot of useful information in this guide, such as relevant encyclopedia and handbook, the journal list, and a key database. If you are ready to conduct a detailed search, you may conduct search in database. Here you can find database by subjects. I click e-resources and I can find different subjects here. For example, I'm interested in education, and I can find I can take a look and decide which database I want to do a search. It is useful to look at the work of other students. You may go to our library guides on how to find theses and dissertations. You can find CUHK thesis and also thesis from other universities in Hong Kong. Also thesis from mainland China, from North America, and UK as well. You may also find journal lists by subjects. For example, I use journal citation reports and found a list of journals in my study. Go to the library search. E-resources. Search Web of Science. select Web of Science. Click Journal Citation Reports. Click Browse by Journal. Expand the category and choose your subject area. I select Education and Educational Research. After selecting the field, click Submit. Then, I can find a list of journals in my field, and also their impact factor. I can choose several journals that are especially relevant to my research topic, and find study from this journal. If you already identify a few studies that are very relevant to your study, you may conduct citation search to track more relevant work. You may use Web of Science, Scopus, Google Scholar to do the tracking. For example, I go to Web of Science and I find a study that are very relevant to my study. I can look at its cited references here, which means the reference list of this article. And for some of them, you can find links to their article to do the further tracking. And I can also track what other studies have cited this research by clicking the time cited. And I find a list of other relevant studies. Many students do not commit plagiarism in purpose. They may simply do not manage the source of their references, so they cannot cite the source properly when they write. I highly recommend you to use one of these citation management tools. It basically works like this. When you download a full text of an article, you can also download the citation file of that article and import the citation file to the citation management tools. Here show an example of my EndNote library. I imported the citation file here and also attach the full text to the citation file. I create different folders to group the study meaningfully to help my literature review. If I double-click one of these items, I can edit the citation information here and also write my research notes here. I can open the full text by double-clicking the PDF file. Every time I can work on the same PDF file so that I can make annotation on this file. Plagiarism. The university places very high importance on academic honesty. Detailed guides can be found on this guide. To avoid plagiarism, you are advised to keep a good record of sources used. You may use citation management tools to help you. Paraphrase long quotation and passages. Limited use of exact wording from the source materials. I use this web page to find thesaurus. For example, the original text, the author used the verb identify. When I paraphrase the text, I want to find another verb with the same meaning to replace identify. So I type identify, enter, and the web page will suggest a lot of verbs with similar meaning to me. It helped me to paraphrase the wording. Cite the source in case of doubt. You can find guidance on citing source here. Please ask your supervisor what citation style they prefer. The step 4 is survey the literature. In the previous step, we search the literature. After we have a list of reading materials, we can survey the literature. In this step, we assemble, organize, and analyze the literature. Do not read the whole article or book at this step. We only need to get an overview. For books, we read the preface and introduction, identify key chapters, ideas, aims, and logic. Seldom we need to read the whole book, and we do not have the time to do so. So we identify the things that are most useful for us. For articles, we read abstracts, introduction, last paragraph before the methodology sections, which is the paragraph containing the objective of a study. Note all headings and subheadings because headings and subheadings are meaningful and used to structure a piece of writing. Make a tentative classifications to organize your paper meaningfully and revise it later. When you are quickly reading the paper, please take note. Describe the main points, methodology, findings, and more importantly, write down the details that are relevant to your study. If you do not write this detail down, you will forget. Trust me. When take notes, use consistent formats and have enough details to note the differences and similarities across studies, because at the end of the day, you need to summarize and synthesize the idea from different studies. You may also build tables to summarize the literature. This is especially useful if you do quantitative study. You may create a table to explain the definitions of different variables and what are the studies you refer to when defining the variables. The table can be included in your literature review chapter. There are different ways to organize literature review. The first approach, chronological, is a timeline approach to organize the literature. This is useful approach when there is a linear progression of arguments or theory development. Publication can be reviewed chronologically if the order demonstrates an important trend. For example, this study reviews the development of building regulation in the historical context. A group study under different themes, and your themes are presented chronologically. We might also organize our literature review thematically, like organize different studies around a topic or a theme. This is a useful approach when your research areas have different lines of development on different but related issues. You might combine the thematic approach with chronological approach too. For example, this student explained knowledge management theory and practice. And before it, it has an introduction and the complexity of knowledge, which this one is used to explain the philosophical area of knowledge. And after that, the student explained the knowledge management theory and practice, how ICT used in knowledge management, issue and concern for effective knowledge management. This slide shows another example. The student organized the literature around different theory. As you can see, there are lots of them. The student review them one by one. We may also organize our literature review methodologically. This is my thesis. I like reading methodology stuff, so I have a chapter to review how other researchers analyze the type of data used in my thesis. First, I give a bit of background, and then I review different methods one by one, such as content analysis, qualitative analysis, and many other methods that I group them under different concerns. Step 5 is critique the literature. In step 4, we only get an overview of different materials, but in this step, we need to read carefully. Critiquing is an art of interpreting the meaning of literature. We do not only want to understand the papers, we also want to read them carefully and critically, so we can go further than describing the current state of knowledge. We can explain the gaps, contradictions, omissions, and debates, define a new and answer and important questions. When we critique the literature, please look for methodological strengths and weaknesses, such as the units of analysis, sampling strategies, types of data, the analytical approaches, validity, etc. Remember to distinguish between ideas and evidence. You might want to use evidence to support your idea rather than others' opinions to support your ideas. Note the major weakness across groups of study. If a lot of studies share similar weaknesses, there should be some valid reason behind it. Please try to understand what the reasons are. When your study also has this weakness, you might point out this issue and show how you manage it. So the grouping of different studies are important. If you do not group them in the previous step, this is very difficult for you to note the similarity shared by different studies. Here are some questions for you to consider when critiquing the literature. Do I follow through a set of concepts and questions, comparing items to each other? Instead of just listing and summarizing items, do I evaluate them critically, discussing strengths and weaknesses? Have I cited and discussed studies contrary to my perspective? Do you evaluate design and methodological issues? Can you approach the problem from another perspective? The final step is to write the literature review. Here is the structure of a good literature review. The introduction sections. This is very difficult to write, but once you make it, you will have a better idea of the organization of your literature review. People usually force themselves to write this one first. In the introduction section, we introduce and define the topic, provide an appropriate context for reviewing the literature, also give an overview of the central theme, overall and organizational pattern. In the body, we compare and contrast the sources. Provide your own interpretation of the sources and synthesis or bring together similar views. Organize the review chronologically, thematically, or methodologically, depending on your topic. This is important for us to group study together meaningfully when we critique them. Otherwise, this is basically impossible for us to compare, contrast, synthesize, and organize your literature review. In conclusion, we sum up the main finding from the review. Highlight major contributions of significant studies. Highlight major gaps in research. Make recommendations on areas for further study. Here we justify why we need to conduct our study. Quite often, after writing the body and conclusion, people go back to revise and refine the introduction. Writing is rewriting. Be prepared, your supervisors will ask you to keep rewriting and revising your writing. Please do not feel bad. We are all doing the same. Here is some tips for you. Reviewing notes written throughout the literature review process. If we do not take notes in the previous step, this is very difficult for us to start writing. Writing an outline. The outline is a plan for writing, sequence of ideas, and a roadmap of the argument. Providing an overview near the beginning. Provide a topic sentence to specify your view in every paragraph. Summarizing your ideas periodically. Using subheadings in long reviews. All this can help the readers to understand and follow our ideas. Evaluating your reference list for currency and coverage, especially for PhD students. You may conduct the search 2 years ago. You might want to update your reference list before you finalize your thesis. Reminder, keep a journal to record search strategies, terms, keywords, and sources. This record can help you to further your search and avoid you repeating the same search. If done properly, it can be part of the methodology sections. Please also describe the developments and changes of your research topic. This is to keep track on the changes of your research topic, so you know how your ideas are improved over time. Please also record the daily process. During the reading and writing, you will have a lot of different insights, observations, questions, and reflections. If you do not write them down immediately, you will forget them. As you know, PhD stands for permanent head damage. Do not trust your memory. These insights can help you to find new ideas and patterns. When to do a literature review? A review is needed at the following stages: before the research commences, during the research process, extend the research, especially for PhD thesis. You need to relate your finding with others and identify implications for further study. So after data analysis, you might have to do literature review again. Be prepared to rewrite, revise, and edit again and again. Here are some tips for writing. Start writing when doing the review. Don't wait until the last minute and write regularly. Write in a formal academic style. Keep the line of argument clear and concise. Do not use extensive quotes to replay your own interpretation and summary. Use present tense for general opinions and past tense when referring to specific research or experiments. Use a diversity of accurate and appropriate wordings to paraphrase its sources. Get to know your citation style early. For example, you can consult the publication manual of the APA style. And here are the reference lists for you in case you might want to read more books and paper about how to do a literature review. Okay, this is the end of my presentation. I hope you found the presentation useful.